Pakistan is set to get a $3 billion bailout from the International Monetary Fund. The country is close to defaulting on its international debts. So, will this deal save Pakistan, or could it push the country deeper into debt? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. Pakistan is facing its worst economic crisis in decades. Dwindling foreign reserves and a fall in the value of the rupee is fueling soaring inflation. Political chaos has scared off foreign investors, and last year's devastating floods have added to the many challenges facing the country. Many hope that a standby deal with the IMF will offer some relief and prevent the country going into default. Well, Pakistan's been negotiating with the International Monetary Fund for more than a year, so what terms has it agreed to? Well, the country's revised budget for this year is to raise to $1.34 billion in new taxes. And in the past few days, it agreed to hike the main interest rate to 22% and keep it high for the coming year to curb soaring inflation. Fuel and energy subsidies introduced by former Prime Minister Imran Khan are being ended. The new government says the budget is as people-friendly as possible. But Pakistan is still struggling with its highest inflation rate since 1957. And many in the country say that reduced subsidies coupled with higher taxes won't bring the relief they need. So let's bring in our guests for today's discussion. From Lahore, we're joined by Zeeshan Salahuddin, who's a political analyst working at the consultancy firm Tabad-lab. And in Islamabad, we have Maleeha Lodhi, who is a political scientist and former Pakistan ambassador to the United Nations, the United States and the United Kingdom. Welcome to you both. Maleeha Lodhi, ambassador, let's start with you. $3 billion sounds a lot. But given the size of Pakistan's economy and the state that it's currently in, $3 billion isn't that much at all. Is it going to be enough to get Pakistan's economy back on track?
The short answer is no, it won't. It is a short-term arrangement which will address Pakistan's immediate, urgent need not to default, not to have a debt default. Of course, it comes as a huge relief because it does mean that Pakistan is able to avert default. But because Pakistan's financing needs are so enormous, this short-term arrangement can only provide very limited breathing space. And in a few months' time, Pakistan will need to go back to the fund for a longer-term arrangement. To give you one example, Pakistan needs in this fiscal year, which started today, in fact, almost $23 billion to fill the financing gap on its external account. Now, this $3 billion is not going to really help do that. And in any case, Pakistan has to do much more to turn around its economy than simply getting funds from the IMF. It needs to take many structural measures which can then address Pakistan's perennial financial crisis on a durable basis.
You say perennial financial crisis, Ambassador. Why is it a perennial annual crisis? How did Pakistan get into this mess in the first place? And why is it so perpetual?
Well, quite simply because successive governments have been living beyond their means. They have failed to raise taxes to match the expenditure. And on the external side, I think they have been borrowing rather than, again, finding ways to increase our exports, because we do have a huge gap in our trade account. We have a huge gap in our current account. We have a current account deficit. So really, the source or the roots of Pakistan's financial crisis is actually its fiscal crisis. So unless Pakistan is able to deal with this, because, successive governments, as I said, have simply kicked the can down the road. That's why we've been in almost 24 IMF bailout programs.
Zeeshan, is this loan, going to mean anything to the average person in Pakistan? Will it improve their lot at all, struggling as most people are in the country with the cost of living crisis?
That's a very good question, and I will very much echo everything that Excellency Lodhi has already mentioned. It's possible that this could have some kind of an effect on the average public, but not for the reasons that would be sound, and certainly not for economically sound reasons. For instance, having this money could mean that the incumbent political party, that being the PMLN and the PPP, simply because they have some money in the coffers and now perhaps the ability to conduct elections in addition to not defaulting, given that it's election season, they could enact a range of protectionary measures to protect the consumer against inflationary pressures. This not only would go against IMF stipulations and go against what the IMF wants Pakistan to do, which, as Excellency Lodhi mentioned, is rationalizing our expenditures against our revenues, but it will also be detrimental in the long term, because in order to garner short-term gains, those being votes at the polls at a time when the two political parties currently in power are perhaps at their lowest in terms of both performance and popularity, would be a nightmare scenario for the country. So yes, there could be some relief, but that relief is not necessarily going to come from a sound set of decisions made by the people in charge. You also asked the question about why this is happening, and I will very much echo Excellency Lodhi's statements that yes, we cannot rationalize our expenditures. We have been historically unable to hold on to the hard fiscal measures that would be very painful in the short term, but good for us in the long term, in the pursuit of protecting the consumer from inflation or holding the rupee steady in the floating rate in the international markets. Our state-owned enterprises are operating at a huge loss, and so on and so forth. We can get into a range of reasons.
Yeah, well, why is that? Why is that, Zeeshan? I mean, is it to do with politics? Is it to do with the fact that governments want to give people a sweetener in the short term, knowing that it's going to cause long-term gain?
Absolutely. And I would say, and Ambassador Lodhi can back me up on this, this is not something, she used the word perennial, and that word is actually very accurate. This is not a problem that exists with a particular political setup or party in the country. This is across the board. The last political party that was in charge up until May of 2022, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, for example, led by former Prime Minister Imran Khan, is, in my view, guilty of the same issues and the same decisions that led us towards a path of economic ruin right before his ouster, recognizing that a vote of no confidence would throw him out. He committed what I would very much call economic suicide by providing this huge fuel subsidy that cost the national exchequer north of somewhere around 250 billion rupees a month, simply to provide relief to the public and to ensure that his popularity stayed as high as it was. And since then, since the new power has come in, this IMF deal has been in the works since September of last year, but because of decisions made by this government, because of both indecision as well as policies and statements, I would say, that are counterproductive as well as not in the interest of the general public and certainly not in the interest of the social contract, the program has been delayed quite literally to its last possible date of June 30th, which is around when it was announced that the 3 billion loan is going ahead. So yeah, it's a perennial issue, and politics is very much at the center of it.
Ambassador Lodhi, your thoughts then on November's election. You talked about governments continually kicking the can down the road. What are the implications of the election for this loan, which I think we've already established is a short-term fix? Is there any danger that Pakistan could renege on the deal after the election? And what are the implications of that if it does?
I think the danger is actually before the election, because we still have a few months to go when this government has to relinquish power and then hand over under our constitution to a caretaker government. So I think there's a real and present danger that the administration of Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif begins to resort to election gimmicks because they know that while Shahbaz Sharif is taking credit for averting a default, they also know that the delay in the IMF program, the delay in taking wise economic decisions has come at a huge cost to Pakistan's economy. Plus, I think the kind of economic mismanagement we've seen in the last year, and of course previously as well, has meant that inflation has really fed into the cost of living crisis that you spoke of, Adrian. And that is going to have an election cost for this government. So I think on the one hand, there is a risk that the present government may start taking measures that can upend actually the IMF program. The other risk is that the new government, whatever government is elected, is going to be a repeat of the past, because what we have seen is that Pakistan's economic crisis have really been rooted in its governance crisis, where we've had reform-averse elites, political elites, that are just not interested in economic reform. And unless there is wide-scale, sweeping economic measures and reforms, Pakistan will not be able to get out of this vicious cycle of high budget and balance of payments deficits, rising debt, and of course, chronic foreign exchange crisis, which have led to repeated IMF bailouts. So the politics obviously is going to play into the economics, and the economics also, the two are interdependent. Obviously, they're inextricably linked. The economics is already playing into the possible cost to the political future of this ruling coalition.
At this point, I'm going to bring in Adnan Jalil from Peshawar. He's a Cabinet Minister of Commerce, Industry and Technical Education in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Good to have you with us, Minister. Ambassador Lodhi was talking about governments habitually in Pakistan living beyond their means. What does Pakistan need in terms of a long-term fix for its economy, in your opinion?
Firstly, thank you for having me. And the relief which we have got it yesterday, it's a very little relief we have. It's just not going to have a very long-standing relief. I think we're going to get, if all get approved, we're going to get 1 billion next month, hopefully, and in the next six to 9 months, we're going to have total 3 billion rupees. So let me talk about the pros of that. The pros are that, okay, the stock market will be stable. It will perform much better from Monday onward, inshallah. And after that, the rupees will have some stability. The threat of default has been gone away. And the sentiments of the market and the business community will be very positive, starting from next work week, inshallah. But in the long term, if you look into it, the inflationary factor will hit the consumer. The livelihood of the people will be disturbed because the conditionalities are very, very tough. And overall, these 3 billions are not going to be enough amount for Pakistan to pay off their liabilities, number one, pay off their bills, and the payoff of all the LC amounts, because one thing might happen good starting from the coming week is that the LCs will have the payment to mature the LCs, because Pakistan is not export-oriented economy. Pakistan is an import-oriented economy, and whatever we export, 40% of that has to be imported. So I think we have to look into it, and there is a strong need at the federal, at the provincial level throughout the country that we must, in real sense, we must bring austerity in the functioning of the government, because at this very moment, the spending is very lavishly. So I think we have to look into that segment also, number one. Number two is that we have to come up with a program by taking the business community into consideration, that this is our target, because the amount of taxation we have, it's countless. It's like I was counting the other day. It's about, if you want to start a business, it's nearly 30 different taxes which we have to pay. So I think we really have to work on the business, bring FDIs from abroad, and we have to convince our existing business people who are already doing business in Pakistan that rather than the capital flight, they must extend. They should bring their capital back, but they have sent it abroad into Pakistan, invest it in a real sense, because unless the expenditures not goes down of the government at the provincial and federal, and the revenue does not jack up, I think this problem will remain. I've been seeing it since my childhood, so I think this will be there. So I think, yes, a brief relief has been there on Eid, but I think the governments have to work very hard.
Ambassador Lodhi, Adnan Jalil mentioned foreign direct investment there. Just how important how vital to Pakistan's economy is foreign direct investment, and will this loan at least give other nations some confidence that they can safely invest in the country now?
I think the key is to create the right political and economic environment to interest investors. We have a situation where our indigenous business community isn't investing. So if they're not investing, how can we expect to increase FDI, which has plunged to an all-time low in the last couple of years? So what is needed is a stable environment, a business environment that is liberal and consistent. And we also need political parties to assure us that there will not be policy changes, because I think the one thing that drives investors away is when they feel that there's no point investing long-term capital in a country where the rules of the game change so often. So I think, talk of FDI right now, frankly, for me, is a bit of a pie in the sky. Unless we get the basics right, it's very difficult to see how any kind of significant foreign direct investment will be possible. And yet, of course, Adrian, you're absolutely right. Pakistan, like any other country, desperately needs this. Our big problem is our external account and the fact that our imports are more than our exports. We have debt payments to meet, and our remittances from overseas workers. We use those. Of course, that helps us in filling the financing gap on the external account. But we also need FDI. And I'm afraid the record has not been very, very encouraging in recent years.
Zeeshan, what are the main drivers of Pakistan's economy right now? Is it fair to make comparisons with India's economy, which of course continues to power ahead? And if India is doing so, why isn't Pakistan's? What does Pakistan need to do to get its economy out of the doldrums and into shape, a shape like India's?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Adrian. I think that is the central question. A lot of the conversation in the last day, and will be for the next week, including from the Honorable Minister and other individuals, will be about how this is in some ways a cause for celebration. And sure, it is. We will avoid default. The rupee will improve against the dollar, absolutely. There will be some level of confidence build both in the national markets and in the investor markets, but this is by no means a long-term solution. There are three sources of income for Pakistan when it comes to the external account. They include remittances, they include foreign direct investment, and they include exports. And we are failing on all three fronts. So one of the first things that we have to do, of course, is to improve the metrics in all three areas. Another issue is the fact that our revenues are very, very low. There's a very small percentage of Pakistanis that actually ends up paying taxes. And that's primarily because Pakistan is very much a cash-based economy. A lot of the transactions that happen in the country do not really fall under the purview of any kind of regulatory bodies or the central bank. And by virtue of that, they just fall underneath the radar. There are some efforts now being made to digitize the economy to try and capture a larger chunk of a larger tax amount from various sources. But what that ends up really doing is it squeezes those that are already inside the tax net instead of improving and expanding the tax net. Another thing that we need to desperately do is to fix our bleeding state-owned enterprises, everything from airlines to railways to the National Highway Authority, certain power authorities, as well as certain steel mills. And in addition to that, I would say, Adrian, one of the things that we really kind of have to look at is something that Ambassador Lodhi has already looked at or spoken about, and that is when there's political instability and policy instability in the country, where you have foreign companies leaving Pakistan left, right, and center. Because of that environment, when you have a hyper-obstructionist and a hyper-risk-averse bureaucracy, when you have the kind of environment which is not conducive to conducting business fairly, quickly, and expediently, that is never going to bring in the kind of investment, the kind of confidence, or the kind of, in literal dollar terms, foreign direct investment that the country needs. And I'll paint this in the simplest terms possible. One of the biggest problems that the Chinese have in Pakistan, for example, in terms of investment here, is that they just want their contractors to be able to do work. They want the obstructionist policies of Pakistan to be taken out of the equation so that what they need to do under the agreements that have already been forged can happen. And the real danger for that, as Ambassador Lodhi also has already highlighted, is that there is a historical precedent here of going back on our word and changing the stipulations under which we agreed to certain loan terms or foreign direct investment or any kind of bilateral agreements. And as long as that instability exists, both on the policy and the political front, foreign direct investment and fixing some of the larger structural issues in the economy is going to remain a pipe dream.
Adnan, Jalil, let's pick up on what Zeeshan was just saying there. about political instability. If the country continues to be politically unstable, there's very little chance of it becoming economically stable, is there?
Okay, I totally agree what has been said just now, because if let's say if any country is not a political stability, has a stability and economic stability, and obviously there's going to be a problem. And this is a problem Pakistan has been facing from the last few years. I think a charter of economy is a solution, and all the political parties must and should sit for the sake of this country. They must sit to make this country a viable country, a great economic country, because we got a lot of potential. I think we have a potential to turn around things, but I think the main problem is the stakeholders. The stakeholders are not trusting each other. I think this is a need of the day, and because I'm a part of the FPCCI, which is the Federation of Pakistan Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I am a prominent member of that. So we are educating on these things, that we are giving a presentation, and we are talking to them right up at the federal level, at the provincial level, that we need this in the business community, need a political stability. And that's what I've been trying in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. We have been trying to bring ease of doing business, although I'm facing a kind of problem on that. Otherwise, I think before my turn finishes, inshallah, I will be able to carry on this ease of doing business in a very successful manner in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So I think the prosperity of Pakistan depends on the political and economic stability.
Ambassador Lodhi, we talked a lot about political stability. What about insecurity, though, and is how much of a drain that is on Pakistan's economy, and military spending too? How much of Pakistan's GDP is it spending on the military right now?
Well, I think, it's a combination of factors, Adrian, and you're right to identify some of the other factors, as it were. But I do think that one of the, what is really needed is a reformist government that sort of looks at has a full spectrum view, as it were, of all the issues that, your other guests have also identified, and I've also tried to identify. So you're right, while security and the challenge that Pakistan faced from terrorism, and of course from the long war in our neighborhood in Afghanistan, 20 years of that war went on. Naturally, the fallout on Pakistan was adverse. And that wasn't going to attract investment when people were unsure, the extent to which this war was spilling over into across Pakistan's borders into its areas of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and the tribal belt. But I think to a large extent, Pakistan has effectively managed the issue of terrorism. And although, yes, there are still security questions, but I think the main if I can put it that way, the main enemy of economic stability is turbulent politics and the inability of our political leaders to agree and even evolve some kind of an economic vision for Pakistan. I think the rest of the problems can still be resolved, but unless you have elected leaders who show responsibility, who also think long-term, because all they think about is the next election and how they can get their votes. But if we have to resolve Pakistan's problems on a sustainable basis and put Pakistan on a path of sustainable growth, then the leadership aspect is key. I can think of no country that has made economic progress that didn't have a leadership in place that was committed to long-term economic measures and that had a capable team to assist it. So I think these are very important factors also. And unfortunately, the poverty of political leadership in Pakistan has contributed enormously to the economic mess.
Zeeshan, picking up on what the ambassador was saying there, I mean, how do you put that sort of political team together and then sell it to the electorate?
Building political consensus in Pakistan, Adrian, at this point is a very difficult task. Pakistan is currently going through what we can call a poly-crisis. There's a lot of existential crises that have sort of melded together, and that amalgamation has created huge issues for Pakistan and put it in a place that historically it's never really truly been in before. There's a political crisis, there's an institutional crisis, there's a constitutional crisis. We have crises related to the economy, security, and climate change. And what I find fascinating is that whenever we speak about economy in this country, or for that matter, building political consensus, one of the things that we always leave out is that of climate change. This agreement with the IMF is for $3 billion. The floods that happened in Pakistan last year, between June and September, cost the country north of $30 billion. That's 10 times the amount. 1,700 plus people died. 1.4 million in livestock was killed. A third of this country, Adrian, through satellite imagery, confirmed this, was underwater. A third of the country was effectively the sea. Climate change is one of the biggest existential crises that this country is facing, and it is going to be a tremendous resource drain. And the bulk of it, the responsibility of it, very squarely lies with developed nations that have created the kind of climate crisis that exists in the country right now. The World Bank, for instance, has been producing reports since the beginning of this year related to the economic crisis. There's the country economic memorandum, there's the climate change and development report, there's the public expenditure report. The middle one, the climate change development report, states that Pakistan needs somewhere north of $200 billion between now and the end of 2030 in order to meet its climate financing needs. We don't have a fraction of this money. Imagine what happens when a country like Pakistan, with a population of over 232 million, suffers adverse effects of climate change to the point that the stress on the system collapses the governance structure.
Okay.
You have
All right.
232 million people with mass urban migration, international migration, refugee management, and a range of host of other issues that the world truly needs to pay attention to.
Okay.
This is part and parcel of that economic crisis, and must be looked in tandem, as Mr. Jalil said.
Zeeshan, I'm sorry to interrupt you. One final, very quick question to Ambassador Lodhi. Picking up on what Zeeshan was saying there, does the international community bear at least some obligation to, should it be obliged to help Pakistan right now, given all that Zeeshan was saying? I mean, you're getting help at the moment from the lender of last resort, the IMF, but should the international community be chipping in too?
Well, I think already the international community, it depends what you mean by the international community. I think China has stood by Pakistan. It's rolled over a number of loans that were maturing, and that gave Pakistan fiscal space. Saudi Arabia helped, they chipped in. The UAE also chipped in. So one can't say the international community hasn't helped Pakistan.
Yes.
But I think the real question is, how much can Pakistan help itself? It cannot keep looking outside to resolve problems which are its own problems.
Okay, all right. Ambassador, I'm sorry to cut you short. We're out of time. Many thanks indeed to all of you for being with us today. Adnan, Jalil, Zeeshan, Salahuddin, and Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi. And thank you for watching. Don't forget you can see the programme again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us on our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the whole team here. We'll see you again. Bye for now.